October 26th, 2021. If you all join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. Councilwoman Freeman.
Present.
Councilman Perticone.
Here.
Councilwoman Romeo.
Here.
Councilman Weiner.
Here.
And attorney for the town.
Here.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to the special town board meeting. I think I'm going to hand it over to Andrew to explain. Actually, he brought this up to me last week that there is December 31st. There are some decisions we can or cannot make by the end of the year. So I just thought we'd bring it out in the open. Carrie and Chief, thank you for being here. I'm certainly sure your input will help out in our decision. So Andrew, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. So I brought it up, as the town board probably knows, back in March, the New York State Legislature enacted the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. It's a historic piece of legislation, basically decriminalizing marijuana in New York State and setting up a process to license the retail sale, consumption, and cultivation of marijuana. So it's a really big piece of legislation. And I guess I'll just give the town board a brief overview of the different segments of the legislation, and then the board action, if any, that the board needs to take before December. So the legislation's 133 pages long, and it's separated into 5 articles. The first article states the intent of the legislature, and the legislature in legalizing recreational marijuana had several intentions: revenue, correcting historic injustice from the overpolicing of marijuana in certain communities, and also providing for a regulatory framework for allowing the sale of marijuana. So that's Article 1. Article 2 is fairly administrative. It sets up several state-level bodies. The Cannabis Control Board, which you may have heard the governor recently made appointments to. That board is essentially the governor of marijuana in New York State. There is an Office of Cannabis Management that is set up in the legislation. That'll be the executive level office to enforce whatever the Cannabis Control Board does. Article 2 also sets up what's called a Chief Equity Officer. That officer's job is to ensure that there's an equitable distribution of the gains from marijuana sales in New York State, going to communities that were traditionally over-policed because of marijuana prohibition. Article 3 talks about medical marijuana, medical cannabis. And then Article 4 is probably the article that concerns the town board the most. That article sets up licensure procedures for cannabis in New York State. Essentially, the Cannabis Control Board is going to have the authority to issue several types of licenses to folks who want to cultivate, sell, or allow the consumption of marijuana in their businesses. There's an opt-out for municipalities, but before I get to that, I want to explain how the legislation already controls placement of these retail businesses. So the legislation, for present purposes, sets up 2 types of marijuana businesses that are important. Retail dispensaries, those are folks who can sell marijuana products, and then on-site consumption licenses. Those are clubs, basically. Think lounges, where people could go and smoke marijuana in a communal setting. Importantly, the legislation already says that you can't site either of those within 500 feet of a school or within 200 feet of a house of worship. So the legislature's already provided some protections that would normally be thought of as zoning measures. Neither of those type of businesses will be allowed to offer gambling, public exposure, meaning dancing or stripping, contests or fireworks. So people that are selling marijuana or allowing marijuana smoked on their premises won't be allowed to engage in gambling, boxing, other types of contests, or the lighting of fireworks. None of these businesses will be allowed to sell to people under 21, and the methods in which they advertise are very strictly regulated by the state. They can't advertise in any manner that might reach children. or minors. Section 127 prohibits discrimination against folks who take recreational marijuana. So after the enactment of the legislation, employers, family court when dealing with custody matters, it'll be pretty much illegal in New York State to discriminate against someone solely by virtue of their use of marijuana. And finally, Article 4, before we get to a local opt-out, provides that when the Cannabis Control Board receives a license to put a retail dispensary or a on-site consumption location in a town or any municipality, the Cannabis Control Board will send notification to that town or municipality, and the town or municipality can then state its opinion on the application. That opinion is not binding, but it'll tell the Cannabis Control Board, we want that here or we don't want that here, and it'll consider that when deciding whether to grant the license. So that gets us at last to section 131 of the statute. This is called the municipal opt-out. The legislature has given municipalities until December 31st of this year to adopt a local law opting out of retail licenses and or on-site consumption licenses. It doesn't have to be both, it could be either. So a town could decide we don't want retail sales, or a town could decide we don't want on-site consumption, or it could decide we don't want both. And if they pass a local law, that local law is subject to a 45-day permissive referendum. Within that period, 10% of a town's residents could sign a petition saying we want to vote on this. Then the town would have to host a vote for that law to become effective. So it's called the local opt-out. Towns have until December 31st to opt out of one or both of those if they want to. After that date, they will no longer be able to opt out. If they do decide to opt out and then change their mind and want to opt in at some future date, they could do that. So it's a one-way ratchet, if I'm using that metaphor correctly. So I mentioned this to John during office hours a few weeks ago. Not because I have any position either way, it's just there's a deadline approaching. I mentioned the town board might want to think about whether it wants to opt out of either of these. If it did want to do that, it'd have to move swiftly because of the 45-day permissive referendum period and the notices that would be required for a public hearing. The town board would have to make its position known, I would say, within the next few days and start calling public hearings.
Andrew, is it possible for you to send us that statute so we can take a look and go through it, and if we have any other questions, to
Sure.
make sure we can have that beforehand and pose them to you or among ourselves?
Sure, and I could email it right now while the
Okay,
board's
thank you.
discussing it.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I just think when Andrew brought this up to me, I just think that we need to talk about it, which way we want to go, because obviously I didn't want to just sit there and we don't do nothing, then we're automatically in, the consumption and the selling of it. So it's something we could talk about. I don't know how everybody feels about it, but I know Carrie, you probably have some opinions, and so does the chief on it as well, too, so.
I have a question.
And then, go ahead, Pete.
So this is a workshop, and then we're gonna have another special board meeting to vote on it, or?
Well, we'll have a public hearing. We'll call for a public hearing.
All right, and then, so this is a three-part operation, and the public hearing is gonna be a part of one of our ordinary board meetings?
Yeah. And then I'm assuming we could take it up whichever way we go, December's meeting, I'm assuming, right?
It'd have to be sooner. So this is the workshop. If the board decides to move forward with opting out, I think the next step would be at tomorrow's meeting, adopt a resolution calling a public hearing for early November. And we have a workshop on November 9th. That's really the only day that would work under the legislation. So you'd have to have a public hearing November 9th. On the proposed local law, it'd have to be a local law. Public would be able to comment to the town board. And then the town board could adopt a resolution opting out.
But, Andrew, two quick questions. One, I do remember, and I believe it was in July, that we added a resolution that talked about marijuana use within the town.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that resolution barred recreational smoking on town properties.
Okay,
So just like we don't allow tobacco smoking on town properties, that resolution said you can't smoke marijuana on town property. But this would be, if the town board wanted to do something with the opt-out, that would concern barring the sale or the on-site consumption at like a hookah bar within the town limits.
Right, but it appears that a resolution is already within our record, within our share point about opting out, but we're just talking about that.
Yeah, that resolution from this summer.
No, it's a resolution that was drafted, it's here.
Yep, this was only for
Your point.
discussion purposes.
Okay.
If the board, we needed an agenda item to
Yeah, we
talk
need-
about it. So if the board doesn't want to move forward, it could just say, we don't want to move forward. But yes, I drafted a draft resolution, so we'd have something to talk about. Because if you do decide to move forward, it's going to have to be quick. But the town board doesn't have to do that at all.
If we decide that we are not opting out, then is there the need for all those other meetings?
No. If the town
Only
board,
if we opt out of one or both
Or
of those
both, right,
aspects.
exactly. If we do nothing, then they both go into effect January 1.
And by doing nothing, we're also eliminating the opportunity for residents that live in the town of Arundecoit to have a voice on this matter.
Today.
Oh, it's a different process, Peter. If we want to have the public meeting and we want people to come out and speak, then we have to opt out. And then if people say they don't like that choice and they want to put it out to a vote, that's fine. We're hearing the voice of the community.
Yeah, I just personally would have liked to look at had the legislation
I think
first
Dave
so
sent
that-
it,
so that I can know what I'm voting on.
I think
'Cause right
Dave
now,
sent
I'm-
it to us.
Right now, I am not sure what I'm voting for.
yeah, and just to be clear, I don't think the town board's voting for anything
Anything
tonight.
right now.
Nope.
It's just a workshop to talk about whether to proceed.
Right.
So
But I
we're
did-
talking about, let me make sure I understand it. So the only thing we're voting on is a workshop for a public hearing. We are not opting out
No,
or opting in.
today there doesn't have to be a vote on anything.
Okay,
If
great.
you decide to adopt the resolution, the way the local laws work is at tomorrow's meeting, a town board member, one of the four of the members, would have to introduce the local law. Then the town board would pass a resolution calling a public hearing.
So we would have to introduce a local law to opt out?
Yes, that's right.
So we
and-
can't have a public hearing without opting out?
That's right. No, you can't have a public hearing without a local law being introduced. You're not actually opting out until you adopt the local law. But somebody's got to introduce it first. Hold a public hearing on the proposed local law. Then the town board, after it receives the comments from the public, can decide whether to adopt the local law or not. If it decides to adopt the local law, then there's a 45-day period that the public could sign a petition and force a townwide vote. That doesn't happen very often. I think the last time there was a referendum on petition related to the library. And frankly, if a petition were filed, I don't know how we could get a vote done townwide by December 31st. It just wouldn't happen. So the town board's not committing to anything tonight. If it decides that it wants to explore this local law, then tomorrow it would have to adopt a resolution introducing the local law, just introducing it, calling a public hearing.
And it can be introduced either way, correct? Doesn't have to be opt out, it could be opt in, right?
There's no need to opt in. If the town board doesn't want to opt out, then that's just the default. The town will, so you don't have to opt in. If the town board doesn't want to proceed with getting out of either of these, then eventually the Cannabis Control Board would have the authority to grant licenses within the town.
And just another question. So this was just an oversight, I guess, that we didn't, because it just seems very tight
It's
to
tight.
me.
No, the statute was enacted in March, and I mentioned it, I discussed it
And I
quite a few
understand.
times.
I'm
with
just,
this-
my question is, we could have,
Yep.
could have been brought in July, we could have been
It
brought
could
up
have
in
been,
August, it could have been brought up in September, so we can even earlier this month, so we can have more time to go through it. I like to go through and look at both sides and then make my decision.
Yeah, any member of the town board could have before now raised the issue. It's been on the books since March. And because it's an opt-out, it's, the way, opt-outs are weird, and I think the legislature did this intentionally, is if you do nothing, sales will be allowed in your town. So unless somebody had the initiative to say, let's talk about pot, it would not have gotten raised. I raised it at my last office hours meetings with the supervisors just because I said, look, the deadline is coming.
Right.
You need to know about it. And that's what prompted this workshop meeting.
And I appreciate your answering my questions, but I'll re-say it. I just wish I had more time to take a look at the stature.
That's fair, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't think I want to do anything without us having a public hearing in the matter.
I would be in favor of opting out so that we can go through the public process. I think that's very important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm for it too. I think we need to have a public hearing and just hear what people think, and then we can make a decision that.
Right,
You know,
but
do-
to do nothing is
Peter?
also to do something.
And Peter, I'm with you. I'd like to have all the information before I make a decision, including input from the public.
But if you
Well,
don't
we
opt
have-
out, you won't have that input
Wait,
from the public,
We have
Katrina.
to opt out in order to have a public
Kimmy, I
hearing?
understand.
Yes. Well, yes. The way the timing is, so I don't know if you could call a public hearing without a matter, without a matter to be discussed. You could probably call public hearings and say, look, we want to either opt out or not opt out and decline to take action. Given the timing, you've got 45 days before the new year, maybe 55 days. I don't see a good way to
I'm
go
not in
about
favor of opting out or opting in order to have a public hearing. I don't want,
We just want to hear from the public.
Right.
What they
But if
feel.
Andrew, could we possibly do an information session to kind of get the information, the input from the public? So this way, we're not opting in or out, but it will give us an opportunity to hear from the public without violating any of the rules that govern us? Is that possible?
I think it'd be tight. So, frankly, the town, just to be candid, the town doesn't do anything. If there's not the legislative will to opt out, you don't have to do anything. If you wanted to call like a public informational session, you could do that. The thing is, if you actually wanted to opt out, if the town board was inclined to opt out or take public feedback to opt out, you'd have to get a public hearing noticed. You'd have to have a local law on board members' desks 10 days before the hearing. If you actually want to opt out, I think you need to do it in the next 2 days, calling
Yeah,
a public hearing.
we won't have time.
Yeah, I
If
think
we-
if we call for a public hearing, I think people will be educated and they'll know what we're
Right.
talking about, and they'll be informed, and I think they'll state their opinion, whether it's for or against, and, I mean, then we'll make our decision.
And just to be clear, we can opt out, and then at any point in time, we can opt in. What we cannot do is miss the opportunity to opt out, miss the opportunity for the public to have input, and then change our minds. That we cannot do.
That's correct. One thing I will say, if the town board declined to take action, and then the Cannabis Control Board, let's say a year from now, wanted to cite or grant a license within the town would still have the opportunity to present a statement of opinion. And also, the town still has zoning powers. So one thing, you might recall what we recently did with tobacco was we passed a local law barring tobacco sales within a certain number of feet of a school, playgrounds. Now, the state legislation already does that to an extent, but there are other ways that towns can regulate businesses. They can do hours of operation. There's something called time, place, manner restrictions. We'd have to research how much of that's superseded by the state law, but the town would still have its zoning power. It could say what districts it wants pot not to be sold in or consumed in.
But we would not be able to say, as a
would not.
town, that we didn't want it to happen within the town.
That's right.
We would have to,
You'd have to grant it.
I'm going to state, again, because I want this, and if it could be in the records, I strongly am uncomfortable with voting on this without having any idea what our residents would like, and not having reviewed that information before today. The statute, I am uncomfortable with it, very.
Well, if we have a public hearing, it's going to be we said the public hearing is going to be the 9th,
It'd have to
right?
be the 9th.
All right, so that's 2 weeks. So, we call for a public hearing tomorrow night.
I'm speaking at a conference on the 9th, and the time ends like right before 4 o'clock. And so that means that I'll either be here late or late.
Well, if it's gonna be our, workshop the 9th, correct? So we can put it on a little later on the agenda, Pete, you know what I mean? Make sure that you're gonna be here. Depends how
Well-
fast you drive.
Yeah, and if it's a public hearing, we have our own town law. Public hearings have to take place at 7:35 or later. So if you wanted to call the hearing for the 9th, you'd have your workshop at 4 PM like usual.
Yeah,
You'd have to gavel out at some point.
right,
go
and then
eat
start up
dinner.
again, so.
Andrew, I want to ask you this question again, and if you can just answer it for me,
Sure.
so I can not hear any other voices, because I need to understand this, I'm trying to understand this. We would have an option to do an information session, and based on an information session, we can make a decision to opt out, or no? I'm asking.
I think you'd have to do them both in parallel.
Okay.
I think you could call a hearing and then quickly call like an informational workshop to happen on a similar parallel time track. But if you actually want to opt out, I think you've got to get that ball rolling. And if you also want to hold an informational session before that, I think you could do that.
Well, I mean, I don't know how detailed you want this informational session, though. I mean, I don't know, just what you said tonight, kind of like, I mean, we're gonna go through 131 pages. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I think,
So,
yeah.
I think if we do it at the public hearing, I think people that come here, I think they will do their homework, most of them. I think they'll know what's going on. And then in the meantime, we can look at.
Right,
what's-
and
you
we
could
can
look-
also put the information out there so that the public has a voice, because at the end of the day, we aren't obligated to anything. The only thing that's going to obligate us is doing nothing. This is the oxymoron here, but doing nothing obligates us. But if we start the ball rolling to opt out, we actually have an opportunity to hear the community, who I think deserves a voice in such a paramount decision.
So, just before we go on, Carrie, you wanna make some comments?
Yeah, so in talking with some of my peers from other towns, this is one of the things that, they were like, what are you guys doing? And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, we know we're gonna be exploring that. I know other communities are moving forward with allowing sales, but they're wanting to opt out of, the gather, I'm sorry, I'm not using the right
bars?
term.
The consumption.
The consumption, the on-site consumption, and I think, from a community development standpoint, I think that's probably where I would land if somebody was looking for what my thought is. But again, collectively, I think that's what the public hearing component of this process would open the door for, is whether or not dispensaries should be permitted anywhere in the town. Is there a thought about where in the town it should be located only? That might help drive zoning change to limit the district or districts it could be sold in. Because I can think of some places in town where it would be better suited or less suited. I'm sure Chief would have a similar perspective. I think from a consumption standpoint, some people will make the comparison to places that, bars and restaurants where you can consume alcohol. My thought, and I would certainly yield to the chief on this one as well, is with alcohol, there's a very clear-cut delineation of you are impaired at 0.08, or you are less than that, or you are more than that or higher. I think with the consumption of marijuana, there's not a clear-cut, at least to my knowledge, there's not a clear-cut definition of impairment. And so for that reason, to me, it feels like it would be a better take it and go home, or take it and go somewhere else and don't be driving. So versus please come and enjoy it here in the town and then be on your way, and we hope you're okay to drive. And I'll pass the mic to,
Yeah,
Go ahead, chief. Go ahead.
sorry, yeah, like Carrie was saying, there's the, many concerns for law enforcement in this. First and foremost, locally, before I start thinking, say anything globally, is where the location's gonna be. I know the state law says, 500 feet from a school. We have neighborhood schools. That's, we have 23 schools in this town. So those are all things that we have to think about. One of our schools has residents. High schools, they're high school age, I get that. But, look, we have kids that drink underage as well. So where the location's gonna be, what are the hours of operation gonna be? you know, bars are open till 2 in the morning. A majority of our DWI accidents are afternoon, happy hour into the evening, which is, we have a very strong stop DWI enforcement. But as Carrie was saying, for somebody being under the influence of drugs, there's no real specific delineation. Okay, are you impaired or not? Some say it's just a matter of use of it. With that, there's also, so for if somebody's driving while they're intoxicated by alcohol, we have a breathalyzer. We have ways to determine right then and there what their blood alcohol content is. With drugs, it's either by urine sample or by blood sample. Those things take weeks to get back. As you start talking about weeks, then we have to worry about discovery, because tickets are issued, they get arraigned. As we have discovery timelines to meet, these cases could end up being dismissed because of the sheer number of them, which then all that does is empower folks to drive while they are impaired, because there really is no way for us to enforce that. Well, we can enforce it, but there's no penalty from the court if the cases are continually getting dismissed. The other big thing is, in conversations with some of our DRE experts, we have 2 DRE experts that work for the police department, so I've had some quick conversations with them. But obviously these are the folks that I would lean on. With alcohol, after a period of time, you get a hangover. That's when the alcohol's out of your system. Your body's trying to recover from it. With marijuana, it stays in your system for weeks. While you don't have the outward effects of the bloodshot eyes, the glassy look, it is still affecting your fine motor skills of driving. It's still affecting your ability to comprehend what's going on. So if somebody uses marijuana recreationally on a Saturday night and they stay home for the weekend, when they drive to work Monday morning, they still have the effects of it. And those are big concerns for us. So those are conversations that we would really like to have with the board in further depth as we move through this process. Thank you.
So, what do I mean, the feeling of the board, I think we'll have a public hearing, but chief and the officers, they want to talk to us too about the facts. My initial, Chief, are you saying maybe no sale at all in town? Is it one of you strongly feel that way,
If I had to,
Yeah,
if I had to choose, I would prefer neither.
Yeah,
No
neither,
sale,
either
no
or,
consumption.
okay.
If I had to make a choice, then definitely no consumption.
Yeah, no consumption.
At all.
And again, when it comes to consumption, I don't know, they're gonna have, I don't know what it's gonna be like to have consumption there. I don't know what it's gonna be like. I'm certainly sure it's gonna be like a bar, I'm assuming.
I don't know if you can have alcohol with it or not.
No,
That
but I
was one
mean, the
question.
atmosphere, people are gonna be, you know what I'm saying?
I was thinking,
Yeah.
my thought was, is it gonna feel like either to the point of like the hookah bar reference, or even a cigar,
cigar room.
a cigar room, which is a thing that happened,
Right.
10 years ago, that I don't even know if that still exists,
Yeah.
but now instead of it being a cigar, it's with marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if other states, have both consumption and dispensary. My son goes to school in Boston, so I'm familiar with dispensary. You wouldn't know if you're driving by a dispensary or a bakery, except for there's a line of people outside. So
Yeah.
it's either maybe it's both in those cases. But for me, from a zoning perspective, I feel like I'm not sure how I feel about the dispensary portion. Certainly consumption, to me, feels like it's inviting potential problems.
Isn't is Ridge Road all Arundequoit, both sides of the road?
Up until a point, and then we are in the city of Rochester. So just around, right near the post office, is the end of the town of Arundequoit, right? Is that the? Marburger Street.
So again, just to repeat what Andrew said, if we bring a resolution to the table tomorrow to say that we're opting out, we still have the ability
Yep.
to have a public hearing, to hear from the public, and to then decide what's the best thing to do. If we sit on our laurels and we do nothing, we are actually making a decision for the community without their input.
And then the only option we would have at that point, and I would be to either try to adopt zoning regulations to potentially limit, but that can be challenging right now, given the districts that we have. So we could treat it with the same way we treated adult uses, where it's allowed, but you try to control where that can happen. But I think ideally would be, if we're able to move forward with a local law to consider opting out of one or both, that.
And see where the public puts us. I just feel like the public input in this matter is paramount, and I don't think cutting them out of the picture is acceptable.
Yeah, I just don't like having to opt out in order to get the public input. I mean,
But all we're doing is making a resolution to opt out, Peter. We're not actually opting out unless we decide to do so after the public input and after the recourse.
Right, so, and maybe, Andrew, the question for this local law, this is a little bit different because you, like you said, you're taking an action to maybe not take an action, so it feels a little bit backwards, but if we went through the process and had, the town board presented the local law and a public hearing was set, and the public hearing, say the feedback is all in favor of, we want it all, we want
Right,
the.
or we want dispensaries, right?
We want
Maybe
dispensaries,
that's
yeah.
what the public says.
So then the local law could be modified.
Yep.
To say we're going to opt out of one and we're keeping the other one in, or we're opting out of both, or if the determination is made by the board, hey, we're in favor of everything, then you do nothing and you let New York State proceed with its process, and by virtue of not doing any local law, you're in on both. Is that
Correct.
my understanding? I want to make sure I'm clear on this.
That's right, and just to be fair to the state legislature, you know, the hundreds of assembly members, the state senators, the governor, they wrestled with this issue for years, and the public had ample time for feedback at the state level. So it isn't that there hasn't been any public input, it's just, it's regulation of a controlled substance in New York that pretty much is the bailiwick of the state and federal governments. The state has given the town very, very limited availability to just not let the licenses in their towns. I will say, and maybe I didn't do a great job of explaining this at the start, the way local laws work here in the town is a town board member has to introduce every proposed local law. The same with resolutions. I took a stab at drafting something just so the town board could have something to work from, but that is not at all etched in stone. If the town board wants to modify that Word document, any member could do that and introduce the local law. The next step is the town board has to adopt a reso calling a public hearing. And I think that gets to what you were saying. If the town board doesn't want to hold a hearing, or if it does, it's got to vote on it. If you don't get enough votes, this doesn't happen, you know. So any town board member could amend that Word document and introduce the local law as they see fit. The way I drafted it as a proposed draft only related to on-site consumption, did not relate to retail dispensaries, just because that's what the supervisor and I discussed in our office hours.
So do I have to have a motion to have a public hearing?
No,
Or,
not
No.
till tomorrow.
No, what
Okay.
would happen is the town board, probably, if it was going to do this, somebody would have to introduce a reso calling a hearing tomorrow.
for tomorrow, okay,
And that reso would have to have a draft of the local law
Right.
annexed.
again, I mean, how does everybody feel about that? Because we have to do it tomorrow evening.
I
So-
would be very much in support of
Yeah.
making that resolution happen and opening this up so that we can have some public input.
Okay, so that's what we'll have to do. Katrina, how do you feel?
I've already stated how I felt. I would prefer that we weren't rushed into this. I would have preferred to got some information from both the public as well as another chance to take a look at this.
By the time we have a public hearing,
resolution.
it's gonna be a couple of weeks.
I understand,
Yeah.
but
Which-
I'm just saying what I would prefer.
Peter,
restate the question.
tomorrow night, we have to have a resolution to call for a public hearing on the 9th of November. So it's a couple weeks away. I think that's enough time for, us as a board too, if you gotta do your research, you can do it. And then we'll we'll call for a public hearing. Tomorrow
wanna do
night, and then
anything
we'll
without
call
hearing
for the
from the
public
public,
hearing, it'll be
so-
on the 9th. I feel strongly too that we need to hear from the public.
And this is the best and the right way to do it. And actually, if you go back and look in your emails, Dave did brief us on this early in the spring when it was coming down. He had an ear to the ground, so to speak, on all this legislation, so you'll probably see some comments and things that he made, and this is exactly how he saw us working through this process.
Yes, Kimmy, but still, if the agenda could go out, if the notice could go out about that we were going to have this workshop, I would have liked that information to still go out again so I can take a look at it. The spring has been a very long time. We've had a lot of resolutions go before us since then. I just would have preferred to have it that way. And that's just the way I work and I operate in understanding what I need to know in order to make a knowledgeable and well-informed decision. Right now, I don't feel as though I can make an informed decision.
That's why I guess we're gonna get information.
So again, what are we gonna, tomorrow night?
Can I work with you, Andrew, on that resolution?
Yep.
All right, we'll make sure that it's
Resolution
tidied up.
Calling for a public hearing on the 9th. It's 7:35.
It'd have to be at
Right.
7:35.
And the current resolution that's in the SharePoint, we're not going to use that. We're going to draft a different
Well,
one.
it's just a draft.
That's correct.
That's what it sounds like, or a modified version. of
Kimmy,
it.
I was, if you don't mind, I was asking Andrew so I can understand.
Yep,
Thank
that's,
you.
that's what it sounds like, and, you know, it sounds like, Councilmember Romeo wants to be the one to introduce the local law, so I can help you revise that draft however you see fit, and also revise the resolution however you see fit. And then tomorrow you would introduce it. You'd introduce the local law. And then you'd probably also, it wouldn't have to be you, but you'd probably also be the one to make the motion to call a public hearing, to adopt a resolution calling a public hearing. That's how it would work as a matter of logistics.
And I would probably lean on you, Andrew, to explain to the public the process that we're going through and why we're moving in this way so that we can open this up to a public hearing and get the public input that we all would choose to have.
And I'm sorry, can I just chime in? Typically, when we do a local law that's introducing potential new legislation for the town, we also post that information on the town board's page. So the draft local law in whatever form it is. And again, I think at that stage, it's only a draft, right? So it's subject to change. I think about every local law we've done with zoning changes, any of the things that we've added to town code or modified in town code, we've had some version that was initiated at the beginning, and by the time it gets to adoption, it looks different because of input and conversation among the board members and input from town staff. But, so there'd be opportunity to post it on the website and maybe even also provide the information about the legislation from the state. We maybe need to put that in PowerPoint, and I'm happy to help you with that if we want to do like a summarized version and then put the full regs out there for anybody who might want to read 131 pages worth of state legislative.
Yeah. And maybe, you know, Article 4 is really the only one that matters. There's
Yeah,
an
probably,
article about medical cannabis that probably doesn't concern.
maybe just that one article so that condenses what people have to focus on.
Yeah. But yeah, just to be clear, just to get the matter up for discussion, I drafted a proposed local law. But any board member could change this and introduce something different. This is literally just a draft. So we can talk tomorrow, Kimmy, if you'd like. And I'll
Perfect.
make whatever changes you want to change. And then we can introduce it. And
Awesome.
then the board will have to decide whether to call a hearing.
You're gonna put it out with track changes?
Okay, sure.
So that's what we'll wind up doing tomorrow. We'll be calling for a public hearing through their resolution. And Kimmy will sponsor it. Anything else? Everybody good? Thank Chief and Carrie, thank you very much for your input. Obviously, you're sticking around too, right? You're not going anywhere. So with that, thank you, board members, for your input. I think that we'll do that. We have our budget meeting starting at 5:30. So I need a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Moved?
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye? Opposed? Meeting is